Hi, welcome back. So, picking up where I left off, I was discussing the interpretive approach to myth, which sees myth as a vessel for meanings that people have about different things in society and culture. And so one thing that myth may tell us about is it might tell us about the relationship between men and women. And I was reviewing the fact that many myths, it's been noted, have heroes who are male, and that women tend to have their feminine qualities de-emphasized. And so if you look at the story of Adam and Eve, this is a great example of a myth that tells us about men and women, because you have a male and a female actor. They're the only people on Earth, and they're doing things, and people have tried to pull meaning out of the story and relate it to men and women in the modern world. And so I was saying that, some people say, Eve ate the apple. She was tempted by the snake, so doesn't that mean that men should run things because women have poor judgment? There's this other interpretation of the story of Adam and Eve, and that's that Adam was actually with Eve when it all happened. And if that's true, then what was he doing? Why didn't he speak up? Why didn't he stop what was happening? Instead, he stood by and watched. He did nothing. And so in this interpretation, men come off looking less worthy of leadership, or at least as bad as women on that score. So myth might be sending messages about gender relations, about, for example, what it means to be a man and a woman, and what their relationship ought to be. But remember, like all religious symbols, texts, rituals, etc., myth is open to interpretation, which means it's also open to reinterpretation. People can draw different meanings from the same story. One interesting kind of counterpoint or companion maybe to this little analysis of the story of Adam and Eve is from the island of Vanuatu, which is an island near New Guinea, where men and women enjoy equality in family life, politics, economics, and religious life. People who've spent some time with the folks on Vanuatu say that women have just as much power in these spheres and in society in general as men do. And so an anthropologist named Maria Lepowski has looked very closely at this case, and she has asked, how is it that in Vanuatu they can promote this kind of male-female equality? What goes into that situation? And she cites a lot of reasons, but one of the reasons that's relevant to our discussion is myth. So Vanuatu people have a creation myth with a male creator deity. However, the people there tend to de-emphasize the creation myth. In other words, they have it, but they don't tell it with as much enthusiasm or as often as another myth. The myth that they prefer to tell is the story of the snake Bambago. And in this story, Bambago visits the island, and a wise old woman helps the stranger snake by providing her with food. In return, the woman received the first valuables and knowledge of magic used in economic exchanges. So it's the wise woman who helped the snake, who established the practice of reciprocal exchange that's central to the way Vanuatu society works. Indeed, an important source of female power in modern-day Vanuatu is that they participate regularly in economic exchanges. So, in this example, her point, Maria Lepowski's point, is that people in Vanuatu have a myth that promotes a woman as powerful, as having good judgment, as being involved with supernatural creatures, and she gets a reward for doing the right thing, for helping the snake, and the reward is access to valuables and to trade. And those are things that women on Vanuatu are still involved with to this day, and that's part of their equality to men. If you want to know more about this case, you can look at Lepowski's book. It's called Fruit of the Motherland. And but if you take anything out of this last part of the lecture, remember that we can look at myths for their meaning to people and how they help people to understand things in the world, including things like men and women. But also that myth can also be reinterpreted by people depending on present-day circumstances, and that, in fact, that is always happening. The meaning of myths is not stable or fixed. Moving on to the second part, or the second topic for this lecture, I want to discuss a little bit about ritual and what ritual is all about from an anthropological perspective. Winsler defines ritual as any fixed practice that has no evident purpose beyond communication or symbolization. What he means by that is that a ritual may not do anything but tell something, say something, or symbolize something. It doesn't have a practical purpose outside of those things. So a religious ritual is a specific kind of ritual concerned with sacred or supernatural things. So aside from these communicative or symbolic functions, a religious ritual can also be instrumental. In other words, we should remember that some religious rituals are meant to do something in the world, for example, heal somebody. So these are all different aspects of ritual that you can see. Here's an example of an instrumental ritual. An instrumental ritual in this case is this Thai farmer is offering rice, meat, and whiskey at a small altar that he made to a local spirit near his fields. And basically he's asking for health, safety, and a good harvest. And he's asking that the spirit that lives here doesn't interfere with his pursuit of a livelihood on this land, because the spirit, after all, owns and occupies this land. So he's making offerings to it for that purpose. These kinds of small-scale, very individualized rituals for spirits are all over the place in Southeast Asia and many other parts of the world, and often they are aimed at things like fertility, good crops, good health, and other instrumental things. Ritual can also be seen as a performance. So anthropological definitions of ritual have long emphasized the relatively fixed nature of religious ritual. In other words, it tends to be a sequence of predetermined or agreed upon actions. However, there's a newer approach to ritual that emphasizes that it has performative aspects. So the performance approach notes that each ritual is actually conducted by specific individuals for a specific audience in a particular social context, and that's important to the way the ritual gets done. When you see ritual as a performance, it opens up sensitivity to things like innovation or improvisation by the people doing the ritual. If you look at the discussion that I just presented in terms of the way myth is very changeable, it's probably useful to stay tuned to the performative aspect of ritual. Humans are great experimenters and tinkerers. We often seek new ways of doing things, and the ritual as performance approach wants to recognize that. When people do a ritual, they may tinker, they may innovate, they may change the formula and turn the ritual into something new. If you want to recall for a minute the Healers of Ghana video and the Bono witch catcher rituals, or the snake handling services on Sand Mountain, you might see that there are some performative aspects to those rituals. And so think about that. And you can also think of a ritual, that has is open to improvisation, or that has changed over time due to the active innovation of its performers, or because of the context. I can think of a couple of rituals that we have records about going back a long time, and they have changed. And one that comes to mind is baptism. In the Christian tradition, baptism in the Bible is something that happened in a river or other large body of water. Of course, that still happens in the modern world. But you can also see baptisms where the water that's used to conduct the ritual is just a couple of drops on the head of an infant. And that's very different from full immersion of someone's entire body into a large body of water. And so that ritual has changed over time, and why is that, and how has that altered its meaning for the people who are doing it? Those are all things that you can think about in terms of ritual and its changeableness. Another approach to ritual, or a way to understand ritual, is to think about ritual as a rite of passage. And so this was an idea first put forward by a sociologist named Arnold van Gennep. And Van Gennep noted that there are rituals around the world that seem to share a common structure. He called these rituals rites of passage. And these are rituals that move a person from one social status to another. A rite of passage is a ritual that moves a person from one status to another. An example of a rite of passage could be, baptism, for one thing, would be a rite of passage. It moves somebody from a status as unbaptized to baptized, which could be important in that religious tradition. A marriage moves a person from the status of single to the status of married. And so we can look and see these kind of movements of people between statuses and rituals that accomplish that. But Van Gennep, he noticed something interesting about these rituals, and he noticed that they tend to have similar structures to them. So he said, if you look at them closely, you can see that there's an element of separation. So the person who's going to be the subject of the ritual is separated from their normal context. While they're separated, they enter a liminal state. In other words, they're between statuses. They don't have the status of the prior or the status of the later one. They're kind of suspended in between them. And then the final stage is reincorporation. The subject of the ritual returns to normal society, but they return with their newly gained status. The classic account of a rite of passage was delivered by Victor Turner in a description of the male initiation rituals of a people in southern Africa and present-day Zambia. The people are the Ndembu. And in this ritual, the ritual is an initiation ritual for boys to move them from the status of boy to the status of man. And in this ritual, the boys are taken from their villages to a secluded area of the jungle. And while they're there, they undergo special training and instruction about manhood. So we have here separation from the normal society of the village. They go into a kind of suspended state where they're neither boys nor men. They're subject to training and instruction, so adult men tell them what it is to be a man. And then once they return to the village and they're reincorporated into the village, they're no longer boys, but they assume the new status of men. So that's just a quick example of how this separation, liminality, reincorporation can work. Here are some other resources that you can look at for some perspectives on ritual and a web page as well. I'll leave you with one final thing, and that's the example that I also like of separation, liminality, and reincorporation is one that perhaps some of us are familiar with if you've ever attended or participated in a marriage in the European American Christian tradition. Very often, it involves a period of separation for, let's focus on the bride for a minute. Before the ritual, sometimes the brides are separated off into a special room in the church. Let's say it's a church wedding. They may be separated off into a special room in the church. They're restricted from normal contact. Only their attendants can see them. Of course, the groom traditionally is said to not be able to see them, or that's bad luck. So we have separation. We have some liminality in that period when they're in seclusion before the ritual begins. They're not quite single, but they're not quite married. There's something else. And then of course, there's the ritual itself. Once the marriage is accomplished and the couple walks away from the altar down the aisle of the church, they are being reincorporated into society as married people. Their status has changed. So I'd encourage you to, when you look at a variety of rituals around you, to think of them in terms of these elements of the rites of passage. I could reel off a lot of others in Catholicism. For example, the ritual of confirmation. The Mexican and Mexican-American tradition of quinceañera is another one that you could look at and wonder what kind of rite of passage is this. Of course, some of the Hmong rituals as well conform to this, particularly perhaps funerals as a way to move a person from the status of a living person into the status of ancestor, so that they can be with the other ancestors. So think about those examples and how they fit this kind of framework. Lastly, the Ndembu male initiation ritual is mostly a secular ritual. It's a social ritual, but many rites of passage are religious. And I just listed some of those religious rituals, and I encourage you to try to think of others that conform to that three-part structure. That's all I have for you on ritual right now, and I will see you online in the rest of the class. Thank you.